Okay, hi all, welcome to my kitchen. It's Friday, it's August 11th. We're doing a multiple. You may see the corn. If you watched that part of the video, we're gonna freeze corn for winter time. Now you might say, well, it's still August. Well, yeah, but corn season here in Illinois is gonna be coming up to an end probably within the next 4 weeks. So I'm getting a head start in just freezing a few ears of corn. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about all of that. I'm going to point to it right there. Those are tomatoes. That's a half a bushel of Roma tomatoes. And today what we're going to do is we are going to start making, we're going to start canning the tomatoes that you will be using throughout the year in sauces, soups, other things. And we're going to start with that a little bit later because my stove is jam-packed with pots for the corn that I'm doing, and that's another video. I'm going to keep 2 separate videos. I'm going to keep these videos separate so you guys don't get confused, because for those of you that want to know how I do my sauces when I make my Italian food, I'm going to show you step-by-step instructions on how to do that. Now, I use 2 different types of tomatoes when I do sauces in certain dishes. Certain dishes like my spaghetti, my bolognese, my lasagna, my lasagna, use a smooth sauce, and I will show you that down the road. We're not going to do that today. I'm going to show you how to do peeled tomatoes. Now, for this recipe, what you're going to need is sterile quart-sized jars, and you're going to need quart size. Don't go any lower than the quarts, because if you go with the pints, you're going to be doing dozens and dozens and dozens of pints, but you're going to find out that you're going to need a lot of pints to make one recipe. So quart-sized jars are perfect to do. Mine have been sterilized in the dishwasher. They're chilling out in the dishwasher right now. You want to do that ahead of time. Now, the next thing you want to do, and how many tomatoes you do is totally up to you. Last year I did 5 half bushels. So I did the equivalent of about 4 bushels of tomatoes last year. I did half peeled tomatoes and half sauce. This year I'm doing simple. I'm going to do half a bushel at a time, and I'm only going to buy them by the half bushel. This is the first half bushel I have bought this year. Now, normally when I do my tomatoes for the sauces, I get them a little bit later in the season. I get them more in September than I do August, but my wonderful farm stand had them for a relatively decent price this year. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn these into the peeled tomatoes. So in addition to the jars and the tomatoes, and I suggest doing at least a half a bushel. If you do any less than that, you're not going to get that many jars, and it's a lot of work to do less than that. So you might as well do it right by the half bushel. You can always, if you're like, well, that's a lot of tomatoes, you can always divide these in half and do half peeled tomatoes, half sauce tomatoes. So, and some of my garden tomatoes are actually in the pile over here. So I'm going to stop the video right now because I am not ready to do that. I've got something else on the stove that needs to be done first. When I come back, we'll get into the tomatoes. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my kitchen. Today, again, is Friday. It's August 11th. We're doing the beginning stages of making the tomatoes that will make your phenomenal sauces or my sauces. Now, before we get before we get into anything remotely tomato-wise, I'm going to explain a few things. One, I'm going to offer an apology because this video may be long. It might be a combination of me talking a lot, but it's very important to follow these steps exactly because this is how you're going to do any of the Italian dishes that I do. This is your base. This is the start of the base. So, like I explained in the earlier video, I went to my local farm stand and I have a half bushel of tomatoes. You're going to want at least 1/2 bushel of tomatoes to begin with. Now, if you want a lot of jars, and last year I think I was able to can 18 quarts of peeled tomatoes and 18 or 19 quarts of tomato sauce. Now, when I say sauce, this is not doctored, meaning it has no garlic. All it has is basil and tomatoes and salt. That's all that this is. This, again, is your basis for your sauce because every Italian recipe that I do, that any good Italian cook does, will change based on the recipe. Like lasagna uses one type of sauce, bolognese uses a whole different sauce. So you need to start with the best tomatoes you can find. I'm partial to Roma tomatoes, and that's what I've been using my entire life is the Roma tomatoes. Now, if you have beefsteak tomatoes, if you have other tomatoes, can you do this recipe with them? Yes, but not necessarily the peeled tomatoes because those will be a lot different. So try to get the Roma tomatoes when they're in season. And like I said, if you're going to do this, don't get any amount less than a 1/2 bushel because the work that you're going to do for the 1/2 bushel would be the same exact work that you're going to do for less tomatoes, and you're not going to get a good yield on it. Now, let's talk a little bit about things that you're going to be needing. One, you're going to need quart-sized jars. This recipe cannot be done in pint-sized jars or smaller jars. So 1/2 pints, pints, anything up to the pint jars are not going to be used for this recipe. You're going to need quart-sized jars or larger. You can definitely do a gallon jar. Just keep in mind that's a lot of sauce. So what I do is, rule of thumb, is I do quart-sized jars, and depending on the recipe, you'll either use 1, 2, or more quarts, depending on the recipe. Like my lasagna uses 6 quarts of tomatoes, and it uses the combination of the peeled whole tomatoes and the sauce tomatoes. Now, we're not focusing on the sauce right now. We are just focusing on the peeled tomatoes. So, the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need to prep and sterilize your jars. If you go through my jam and jelly series with the peach jams, I've already showed you how to sterilize the jars. I have extra lids here. Those also need to be sterilized. Just put them in a pot of boiling water, boil them for 1 minute, and they'll be ready for your lids or for your jars. You're also going to need a canner, and you're going to need the largest stock pot you have. Now, there are other things. You're going to need a large strainer. You're going to need a big bowl, and you're going to want a couple of cookie sheets. So, let's get started. Like I said, this is going to be a long video. I'm going to try to process this as fast as I can. And I'm going to show you step by step what we're going to do. Unfortunately, I'm going to try to angle you guys a little bit. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do with your tomatoes, one, you're going to want to make sure that they're ripe. But you're going to want to go through all of your tomatoes, making sure that none of them are rotten before you wash them. You're also going to want to remove any stems. Now, I left the stems on these particular tomatoes because these signify that they came out of my garden. And if you're growing your own tomatoes, you can definitely add your own tomatoes, which makes the sauce or the peeled tomatoes your own. Now this one, because he's so small, I'm not going to use that. That's not a good peeled tomato. If you get any tomatoes that don't look ripe or are rotten, you can throw those away. Or really small tomatoes, just put those on the side. You want nice, big, plump tomatoes. And you're just going to go. Now, sometimes what I do is I will dump these out on a table. And it helps to have a very, very large table to do this. Especially if you're doing multiple quarts. Like I said, last year I did 5 half bushels of tomatoes. And I did them all in a 2-day span. This time I'm not going to do that. I'm going to see if my back would rather me do them in small segments. And this is kind of early for me to do tomatoes. Usually I do tomatoes more towards the very end of August or the beginning of September. And like I said, you just want to go through your tomatoes. You want to make sure that none of your tomatoes are green. And that you got all stems off of them. And you might be asking, how much does a half bushel of tomatoes weigh? Well, a half bushel is about 22 pounds worth of tomatoes. That one's a rotten tomato. Throw that out. One rotten tomato in your peeled tomatoes can make the recipe horrible. I'm just filming these out and I'm going to show you guys what I have. And it helps to have a huge container like this. You can buy a plastic bin container at almost any hardware store. You can buy it at your local Walmart. You can buy it at your local Target. It just happens to work that I can put a large amount of tomatoes in this as I'm processing, and I can get rid of these pints, these little pint size. And I'm just going to put these all through there. Once you've gone through all of your tomatoes, obviously take your pint box and move that off to the side. Now, again, for this recipe, what you're going to need is you're going to need a towel, and you're going to switch later on in the video once I start processing the jars. I'm going to change this from a towel to actually a sheet, because the sheet actually would be better when you after you've processed the jars. These jars will need to sit for 24 hours untouched underneath the blanket, pretty much like we did with the jams, the bread and butter, and the dill pickle series. You're going to do the same thing. Now, the processing time for these is a lot longer, and once I get to that step, we'll talk about processing. So, I'll be right back, and we'll pick up where we need to pick up. So, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Let's get started with the peeled tomatoes. And as I do this, I know this is going to be a really long video. Bear with me with this. I will give you good recipes on what to use with your peeled tomatoes, because you can actually use them for multiple things throughout the year. You don't necessarily have to use them for a sauce. But these peeled tomatoes are so good. You can use them in chili. You can use them in soups. You can use them in sauces. And you can, of course, use them in Italian cooking. Now, the first thing what we're going to do, and if you saw that, I put my lids here. They're not boiling yet. And they only need to boil for a couple of minutes to be sterile. But you want to make sure you sterilize not only the jars, but also the lids. Now, in the great big stock pot, and if you're doing more than a bushel, you're going to want to have a huge pot. So what we're going to do is we're going to just fill it up with water, but we're not going to fill it all the way. We're only going to put maybe about 3 inches, and then we're going to add water as needed once we start putting the tomatoes in here. And basically what you're going to do with the whole tomatoes, you're not going to slice them or anything, is you're going to do the same thing that you did for the peaches. You're just going to boil them for about a minute or until the skins start to crack, and then you're going to dump them in cold water. And I'll show you how we do that. So I'm going to show you guys, there's not a lot of water in here. And like I said, you can see the water, this is all non-water, as you can see. So there's about, I'm going to put my hand here. I only filled it about that much with water. And the reason we did that is once we start adding our tomatoes to that pot, the water is going to rise. So if you need to add a little bit of water to it, you certainly can, but you don't need to fill the whole thing with water. Now, I'm going to step away from the camera. You can see right there, I'm pointing to it. That's all the tomatoes. What we need to do is we need to wash those tomatoes. And it's very important to wash them a couple of times. So you're going to wash them with your hands. Make sure your hands are clean. You're going to wash them, dump out the water, wash them again, dump out the water. And I'm going to show you this, hopefully as steps. I'm going to go get them. And can you do this in smaller batches? You can. I got to stop the clock for a second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, my little guy, my Edward, is going to be barking for a minute. Edward, knock that off. Edward, enough. Okay, so I'm going to kind of show you guys what I'm doing. I have water in here, and all you're going to do is take your hands, and you're just going to not smash. You don't want to smash your tomatoes, but you're just going to want to rinse any dirt that's on the tomato. And I'll show you this one prime example. See how there's dirt? You're just going to rub that off. You might need to add more water. Edward, enough. Sorry, he's getting on my nerves. Stop. Go upstairs. So you just want to rub the dirt off of your tomatoes. And you, like I said, you want to do this a few times. And then what we're going to do is we're going to dump very slowly. And this is where if you have a big wash tub downstairs, it's better if you do it in a wash tub, but I have a double sink, so just gonna grab the tomatoes. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put them over here. And I see tomatoes that didn't get cleaned. You can also, if you're not doing a huge if you're not doing a big batch, and by big batch I mean if you're not doing more than a half a bushel, you can do them one at a time. It just will take time to do. So what I've got is I got an empty big bowl here. I'm sorry, I know you guys are, this is very tight space, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the tomatoes. I'm going to just wash them and throw them in the bowl. And you just want to make sure you clean all of your tomatoes. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. You want to wash all the dirt off of your tomatoes. And I'm going to stop the video for a second. I'm going to go ahead and do that with all of the tomatoes. I'll be back in a few minutes.